and I'm the Neurodiversity Support Manager at HMP Lincoln. I've been in role since April 2023. My background, when I left school, I worked at Siemens in Lincoln for 13 years, worked in various jobs, and then I left in 1997 when I had my son. Due to the extensive travelling, I couldn't return to that. So to get back into employment, I started off working in education. Worked in various schools, school settings, and then I went from that to becoming an education welfare officer. My stomping ground was essentially Grantham. Whilst I was an education welfare officer, I qualified at Nottingham Trent University in social care, and then went on to run my own consultancy business for 3 years. That ended due to COVID. So from there, I went to work at Acorn Alternative Provision in Lincoln, where I was the senior reintegration officer for 3 years. And then I went from there to the prison.
Thanks, Sam. Hi, everybody. Morning. Thank you for joining us. So my name's Jill. I do Sam's role, which is the Neurodiversity Support Manager at North Sea Camp. So all public prisons should have either a Sam or a Jill doing the same role. I'd worked in education for 20 years, left education, and then saw a job role that said Neurodiversity Support Manager. And I thought, oh, that sounds interesting. Not a term that was very familiar, only just 2 years ago now, really. And then I was lucky enough to get the job at North Sea Camp. I hadn't worked in the prison system before, so it's been a really significant learning curve from learning all the systems into education to come into a prison system and figure out all new systems and processes. So the premises in my role and Sam's and everybody's really about raising the awareness of neurodiversity with staff, sort of particular things you'd be familiar with, dyslexia, ADHD, autism, brain injury, supporting one-to-one with sentence plan and release. So we always try and build links with community because that makes a positive impact on the men we work with and the community, and sort of breaking down barriers and sort of promoting the work we do. So we work with the University of Lincoln, Soundlink, Screen Synergy, RSPB. We've already worked with schools last October to come in, and then we talked about just the awareness of having supporting pupils in a prison environment and how schools can do that. And then we're doing that again this summer about, you know, there's a school to prison pipeline. So we're talking about neurodiversity in the prison setting and sort of early intervention and support, and that's kind of really what Sam and I are looking at today, about what our roles are and, you know, how we sort of address neurodiversity, because it doesn't start in prison really. It starts, this doesn't surprise any of you, it starts when they're young really. Okay, Sam, I can do the next slide please. Also should be in Teams Bingo. So really, this sort of slide is the context. You'll have to just keep clicking as I talk, Sam. So there have been, very similar to education, a raft of reports that have looked at neurodiversity within the criminal justice system. Just keep clicking because there'll be a few that come on, Sam, please. Okay. So just to range, so they're looking at education, acquired brain injury, ADHD, autism. So the general feeling of across the prison sector for some years is there is a disproportionate amount of people in prison with neurodiversity, and they know they cope less well in prison than your average prisoner, and do less well in terms of reducing reoffending. So there's just, for example, a range of reports that have been published and discussing it, and it ended up, much as it does with education, into a white paper. So the prisons strategy white paper, which is about 2021, 22, that really set the agenda for prisons to say, for too long sort of thing, this has been going on, what do we what do we do about it and what we're going to address, which is partly why you've got a neurodiversity support manager in every prison. That's why Sam and I have got a role and about addressing it. So if we go to the next slide, there were some key things that come as a theme really from each of the reports. And I don't think they were particularly necessarily expecting all the themes to come from the report. So like I said in the top bit, they know there's poorer outcomes for prisoners that are neurodivergent in terms of their experience in prison and then on release. But what the reports consistently headlined and the themes come through is there's no definitive way to collect the data which offers an accurate account about numbers of prisoners with neurodiverse needs. And we're still to a certain extent in that position. We're much better now, but it's not 100% accurate. But that could partly because about waiting for a diagnosis anyway. There's a lack of awareness for training of staff. So prison officers are trained to be prison officers but weren't necessarily aware of neurodiverse needs and how to support prisoners or be aware of how to just change some approach to prisoners, and that would have a significant impact. And then consistently through the reports, terms sort of come about, oh, these prisoners are being difficult, oh, they're really a difficult prisoner, or they do this difficult. So what it was recognised that you started to think about that the change in approach was rather than thinking about this prisoner is going to continuously be difficult, look about the functions and in process within the criminal justice system. Otherwise, they would be continuously left with prisoners that are always going to be difficult because of the system they're in, really. So it was the change of language you can use, approach you can use, which stops you the terminology of prisoners being difficult. So the next slide really is kind of you can just think about this one. It's what I do with the staff when we're in here. I'm not going to test you all, but just on your own, and we're going to look just for a couple of minutes. So we said in the first slide, there is no definitive way to collect the data, but the government have estimates of how many prisoners they think have additional needs across the prison population, and they have estimates of how many prisoners have maths and English of a 11-year-old child, so roughly functionally illiterate, and how many do you think have been permanently excluded from school and end up in a prison, and how many prisoners do you think have ADHD? So that's roughly around 4% of the adult population. Autistic spectrum disorder, again, have a think about what you think of the general population there. If anybody wants to put any guesses, put them in the chat. I can see the chat, Sam can't, if you want to do anything. So in terms of percentage of prisoners that have a history of a brain trauma, now brain trauma is any form of concussion, so a knock to the head, a bang to the head that causes you concussion for over about 30 minutes. A severe brain injury, and prisoners that have been in the care system. So if anybody wants to have a go and just put a low, so additional needs 70 to 80%. There are actually some reports that suggest it's up to 80%. So that's, you're potentially guessing where some reports go. We'll give it a minute, just have a look and have a think. If you, any that you want to roughly pick out, if you want to just put whether you think it's care system or low-level literacy, numeracy, permanently excluded from school, ADHD. So I'll see if anybody else puts in a... I make all the staff do this. They also don't get it right either. So, but it's just the context of sort of the population, the prison. Yeah. Some really good ones come in here. 30% ADHD. Low-level literacy, yeah. Yeah, I think you're doing really good answers here, because I think you recognise already it's starting to think about the theme that comes through and why this sort of links is about the engagement with school, what happens in there, you know, this doesn't surprise anybody. What happens in your early years is really informative to your later stages. So where you're most disadvantaged, where you've experienced the care system, where home life isn't supportive, where education isn't positive for you, the risks of increasing of entering the criminal justice system, you know, are higher. It doesn't show how many ACEs. We talk about ACEs, but gosh, if we included ACEs, we'd probably nearly be on 99.9% really. Sam and I will mention ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, sorry, acronym central. I thought education was acronym central until I came into the prison service, and they can blow your minds with it. So yeah, adverse childhood experiences, Sam does touch on that. So if we move to the next slide, Sam, we have the answers. Here's one I made earlier. So the first one, there are still, although that says 30%, they don't 100% know. There are still some reports, as somebody put in there, Hazel did, about sort of low-level literacy, 80%. They know that 30% is a conservative estimate that have ADHD, autism, dyslexia. So half of the population have English levels of an 11-year-old. So that's functionally literate. 42% have been permanently excluded from a school. 25% have ADHD, so you're not far from you in comparison to, and the reason why I put the comparison is because when you look at the comparison to 4% in the general population and 25%, and that's a underestimation because not all will be diagnosed, is significantly higher than the general population. 16% of prisoners have autism in comparison to 1%. Probably some surprising is 60% have history of a brain trauma. That's a knockout history. 15% have a moderate to severe brain injury, and 24% of prisoners have been part of the care system. That will probably be more as well. It relies on prisoners self-disclosing that they've been part of the care system, and not all of them will do that. Yeah, I think the 60% is quite massive, isn't it? That is to do. The brain trauma often links to adverse childhood experiences. So some of the where parents are, let's word it in a way, where parents are freer with children, they have more exposure to being to accidents and risk. That increases the risk of brain injury, and it's something like 45% of the youth population have a brain injury. So that's where it impacts. Okay, so well done for just giving it a go. It's just to add some context that from the reports, they know there's a significant amount of prisoners, and you can see why they can do less well if you struggle with your reading, your writing. Everything's all about forms, or you get overwhelmed with a system. ADHD, that won't surprise you, probably risk-taking behavior, impulsive, act now, think later, wanting it now, some correlation between drug and alcohol use, being around drugs and using home children. No, brain trauma is really when you get that, it's a knockout history, a traumatic brain injury. And there's the acquired brain injuries from strokes, but we're talking about those that have gone out on the bike, climbed something they shouldn't done, have something drop on the head, done risk-taking sort of activities is really where the brain injury comes. But you'd be acquired brain injury if there was drug use. So yeah, thank you for giving, that's the context really. I think it's over to Sam now to explain what we do.
Okay, so as part of the Neurodiversity Support Manager's priorities, we have a strategy to work to. So there's five priorities, sorry. So the first one was sharing of information and identification of the needs of prisoners. So essentially what my role, because we all work very differently in each establishment, so long as we sort of like get the end result, but because of my social care background, I'm very sort of like I want to keep records and things like this. So I introduced a referral system, which allows staff to refer into me, whether it be through when they come through reception, when they first arrive at the prison, or it could be from education. They're working with someone and they've identified with neurodiverse needs or traits. So that was the first bit. Staff training and support. So all of the NSMs have now created their own training package that's appropriate to that establishment. So mine is the effective communication training, because staff were aware of people with neurodiverse needs and what neurodiversity looked like. But for me, it was more about the effective communication. And I do stress that I feel that this needs to be, a whole prison approach, whether you're neurodivergent or neurotypical. And it's about understanding how we talk to people to get a a positive response for them to engage. And so that was something that all the NSMs had to put in place, their own training. I've just created my own autism training. I had two visitors in last week from ADHD 360 and the virtual autism hub. So now I've sort of like started the training process within the prison. I'm introducing other things as well, just to underpin really what I've done with the effective communication. Number 3 was developing a neurodiversity supportive environment. For me, that was really important because, as you can appreciate, prisons, quite a scary place for people that have never been here. And it's even more, unsettling for people with neurodiverse needs. So it was about, we can only do so much. Obviously, we can't change that much, but it was more about making places a more neurodiverse friendly. So I've created a couple of areas on the wings where it's a quiet space, it's got soft furnishings where it feels a little bit more relaxed, and lots of other bits and bobs. But the 4th one was individual targeted support for prisoners. So I think I have about 10 complex cases on my radar at the moment, and I've got about 97 on my caseload of prisoners, which is about 1/5 of the prison population. So it's quite a high number. And number 5 was preparing neurodivergent prisoners for release. As you can appreciate, people, especially with autism, once they're settled in and they're regulated, the prison system is quite a supportive and comfortable place for them to be because it's so structured. I could see a huge gap when they're being released. For prisoners that I'd worked with, probably 6 weeks prior to them being released, you would see a change in their behaviours, and they would start to get quite anxious, and often their behaviour would peak, and they would be presenting with some quite worrying behaviours. So that is something that I support with. So we look at support plans for them and make sure that they've got all the support they need, linking them up with local services and support to additional community support, as well as adult safeguarding and referrals to social care. So what are my roles at H&P Lincoln? Am I making a difference? Well, funnily enough, this morning I had an email when I got to work, just to give you a bit of clarity on some of the things that we do. The work that I've done with this individual when he first got here, he was very, very unsettled. His behaviour was not good. Quite a young person. I don't know whether he's like proving himself but anyway, he's settled now, 6 months in. I've been working closely with him. He attends my neurodiversity workshop on a Tuesday night. And I had an email this morning, which was really nice, from one of the wing staff to say that yesterday he'd had a bit of an issue with 2 other prisoners who were quite rude to him and upset him. And 6 months ago, he would probably have reacted quite badly to that. And in a nutshell, the officer said, due to the support and work that I've done with him, he said, it was such a different outcome. It could quite easily have, resulted in things escalating. So that was really nice to read on my first day back into work after the weekend. So like I said earlier, I've introduced the effective communication training. I deliver this 4 times a year to staff, so it's an AM and a PM session because it's quite full on. It's about 3 hours training. I think there's about 50 to 60% of staff that have already completed it. And by the end of the year, the whole prison, the majority of the staff should have accessed it all. There is an induction process for staff at Lincoln Prison, and now I have a slot each month just to explain my role, how they can refer into the neurodiverse process. And so all staff are aware, and that is part of the induction process. The evening workshop, that's something that I've done quite early on. I started in April 2023, and I think I introduced it in the June because I could see a big gap on the VP wing, which is the vulnerable prisoners wing. And this has been ongoing, so it's a rolling thing now. It's a 6-week thing where each Tuesday evening, the guys basically run it themselves now. I attend week 1 and week 6, and we have neurodiversity champions on each wing, but they essentially run it. And we cover things like control, triggers, self-regulation, anger, how they self-regulate, and we put goals because it's always important for them to focus on goals. Some of the prisoners have never ever made goals, so that's going really, really well, and that's also on the mains as well, but that's a daytime session. The support plans for release, that's something that I work closely with lots of organisations now, and my networking has really, really developed over the last couple of years. Being a Lincoln girl, I was aware of different organisations, but I was amazed at how much support there is out there in the community. And then moving on from that, I arranged my first networking event, which I would love, the county council to attend when I do the next one, which will be later on this year, which allowed a lot of the local lads that were being released to have face-to-face chats with people from different organisations, so that they could speak with them and explain what they're worried about and how they could support them. So it went really, really well. So I'm hoping to have another one later on in the year. So watch this space. Jill?
Oh, okay. Sorry, Sam. Much similar to Sam, it's raising awareness. So for training for all staff, in terms of understanding neurodiversity, in terms of understanding how to write things easy read, we're now moving towards more personal officers that are specifically dedicated for prisoners that are neurodivergent, starting to adapt processes. Things take time to change in any system like they do in education. But we go forward with that. We have things like, and after once a month we do a downtime session in the library where we have Lego Connects, just a quieter time, usually where the men can come and find me as well. Release, much what like Sam was talking about, so they go with a release plan, so they have a paper copy so they could share it with everybody, which just explains their autism and their ADHD without having to explain it 10 different times. We have things called a hidden alert, so that raises awareness now with staff, so they start to look on that with key information about that individual and how they respond to things, how staff can best support them. We also engage with a range of local employers, because all is when you're in category D, which is mine, which is an open prison, it's about that re-engaging with community. We know community work and family are the key things that reduce reoffending. So some of our prisoners go out to work, so we started training and employers, raising awareness with neurodiversity within their workforce. And much like Sam, we try and do events for employers and events for school staff to come in to, that, like I say, the last one was talking about supporting pupils, and this one is about neurodiversity. So Sam will probably say no 2 days are the same. It's really varied. It's very random. And I would say it's the best job I've ever had. So it's really good. Next one, Sam.
Okay, so as you were saying about North Sea Camp, they're very different, the prisons in the categories. So Lincoln is a Victorian Cat B. Our population is about 640. We've currently got about 580 in at the moment. So we're not full to capacity, but we foresee a few spaces being filled up in the next few weeks. So some of the statistics of neurodiversity, this was from last year. Through the screening process, 967 prisoners were screened for difficulties and disabilities. 72% of the prisoners that were entered into HMP Lincoln were identified as having a neurodiverse need. 32 declared a diagnosis of autism or Asperger's, and 50 declared a diagnosis of ADHD. 62 declared a diagnosis of dyslexia. So it says 1 in 3 of the prison population are neurodiverse compared to 1 in 8, but I think it's a lot higher than that. There's an awful lot of men that come through the prison system that have never disclosed that they have a neurodiverse need. I think it's only sort of like from mine and Jill's role where we take the time and we have those chats with people, and that's when they may disclose that, you know, they've always had a, you know, a struggle one way or another, but never sort of like declared that they've got anything wrong with them being at school. And so I think a lot of people, when they first come to prison, if it's the first, you know, if it's the first time, it may be that they've been excluded from school, possibly for bad behaviour, but actually after some investigation, you know, it's discovered that they have got a neurodiverse need. At HMP Lincoln, we're quite fortunate because we do have 2 neurodiversity nurses. So we've got one at the moment. We're just waiting for the other one to start. And that will open up for us to be able to screen for ADHD and autism whilst they're here, if they're long enough. Because we're a remand prison, it may be that, you know, they do move on once they've been sentenced. So yeah, those figures are quite high, but I do feel that, you know, I think the more that NSMs work with people, I think that it will unpick quite a lot more that actually disclose that they have got a neurodiverse need or go on to diagnosis. Okay, Jill?
It's not that dissimilar to Sam. Mine's a category D, which is an open prison, so smaller population of 300. So, and it changes all the time when you get new prisoners arriving each week, but we think around about 30% of the whole population is neurodivergent under that broad sort of banner. 5% are autistic, 8% have ADHD, 3% have a brain injury. But it's also relying on the men telling you that they've had some sort of brain injury in the past. Not all are obvious. And 10% are dyslexic, and the rest have general learning difficulties. And it's just about keeping that awareness with staff, really, about our population is quite significant. So sometimes, and for a small part of the population, most people will know the same people, if that makes sense. So if we have some here at ADHD, everybody knows them because they're often louder and noisier and more emotional regulation needs support. So that's where they used to say historically, oh, it's these prisoners are being difficult. And it isn't. It's just how that they respond in different ways, and it's about understanding that support need. So Sam's just going to talk about neurodiversity in its broadest sense. I'm just mindful we've only got half an hour, Sam.
Yeah, I'll talk quick.
Yeah, you talk quick.
So I think we all know what neurodiversity is, but basically it's a term used to describe ways that brains work differently from the normal. So it comes under these all different things, as you can see from the visual. But there was a quote from the criminal justice system in 2021, which spurred me on to adapt my training to cover effective communication, because essentially it doesn't matter whether you've got a neurodiverse need or not, how you are communicated to, you know, impacts so much on outcomes. So I think it's just to raise awareness of actually, you know, if we speak and if we communicate in the right way, we get so much more out of people. And as you can imagine, you know, some operational staff, you know, they're very old school. And so for them to sort of like change their ways of thinking and how they speak to people, it was a big learning curve for a lot of them. But I must say the majority, you know, are on board with it now, and they do realise that actually it does help them in their day-to-day, you know, interactions with the prisoners, especially if they do present with, you know, some behavioural problems as well as the neurodiversity. It's definitely reduced, you know, things escalating. So, the Equality Act. So, under the Equality Act 2010, autism and Asperger's syndrome are defined as disabilities, and employers have a responsibility under this act to make any reasonable adjustments to remove disadvantage faced due to disability. So, a lot of our work does work around putting reasonable adjustments in place. One of the things that I do, which I took from my working in schools, was the traffic light system. So for prisoners that do struggle with self-regulation due to their neurodiverse needs, due to maybe mental health, lots of comorbidities in the prison, as you don't just get one, you get quite a few sometimes. And so it's about understanding how we can work with them effectively without things escalating, and for the use of physical restraint. So the traffic light system is something where in the ops panel in their door they have a red, an amber and a green. Green means I'm good to go, yeah, come talk to me, get me out, do whatever. Amber is I'm not feeling 100%, but I'm okay to talk. Red is please just give me a minute. So long as we do safe and well checks on them and just check that they're okay. But as for communication, they're not in that place, and so it does de-escalate a lot of things where in the past prisoners have not been, they've been in that red zone and they've been constantly asked to do stuff, and it's just completely blown everything out of proportion. And so now it does keep things quite calm and chilled, and staff are aware of what they need to do, and how they would share that with staff. So if someone has ADHD and they've got the red traffic light in their in the visibility screen in the door, then they know that they need to give them a little bit of time. It's like working with a child in a school. You're not going to goad them into doing stuff if you can see that it's absolutely going to not have any impact at all. So it's just about reading the room and listening to what people are saying. So Jill.
Yeah. Okay. So in terms of, there are some comments about effective communication. I understand that, and they come in, and that's why I was talking to Sam. I think what with the context we're doing, none of their behaviours start in a prison. So the shocking statistics that we raise, they start as children in homes and schools. And if we can understand it from the perspective of trying to stop them into prison and working out that, schools and parents can support, that's sort of why why we originally started with the prison system. So in terms of the ADHD, our prisoners with ADHD are 8 times more likely to be involved in aggressive incidents. 96% have comorbidity, in that they come to prison, usually they've taken drugs, alcohol, mental health disorders. They are 10 times higher than the general population. So understanding them from perspective of what happens in schools and homes is really key to trying. Some of our role is about to try and raise awareness that they don't come into prison, really. So that's what we kind of want to do. But it's that sadness that you look and think, well, ADHD, 96% comorbidity is a real challenge and a real disappointing. So Sam, do you want to do the next one? We only just touch on brain injury and then look at communication. So in terms of brain injury, do you want me to finish this one, Sam?
Yeah, you do that one.
If you haven't come across it, what we term is our executive functioning, that helps us every day with our planning, with our emotional regulation, with how we respond to people, your speech, and that's impacted. So every time you have a traumatic brain injury, which is a bump to your head as children, that can impact on your executive functioning, and you don't necessarily are aware that it changes, and that's so you can be dysregulated, you're liable to have an outburst, can't control your emotions, can't cope with crowds, find processing information difficult, and that's where you get overwhelmed. And that's also where you can have drug seeking behavior, because sometimes taking the drugs can calm everything down in your brain, and it can mean that you come across the criminal justice system more often. But Sam's going to go into communication difficulties.
Okay. So what can communication difficulties look like? So the first one, obviously, if they've got a neurodiverse need, Attachment issues. We have quite a few that come through the prison system that have attachment issues. Trauma, nearly all of them. Learnt behaviour, acquired brain injury, developmental issues, hearing loss, and lack of exposure to spoken language. So that could be from the more foreign nationals that come through the system as well. So some of the communication tips. I've been on the Autism National Autistic Society, and this is something that I took from them, which I include in my effective communication training. So I think so long as we always remember to be clear, concise with logical language, avoid open questions, vagueness, irony, hinting, rhetorical comments or sarcasm, because people with autism just do not understand any of that. Offer an alternative communication method. So sometimes when I'm working with the guys on one-to-one, because of lack of trust, sometimes when you first start working, they don't like you writing things down. So sometimes and they find eye contact really difficult. So sometimes it is quite difficult to start off a conversation. So I will often give them something to do, and then have this conversation and just keep it very to the bare minimum to start with. Using visual approaches to aid clarity and understanding. So a lot of it is, we'll do things like they'll do drawing, or they'll write down, write down different comments about how they're feeling, just to sort of like get that comfortable, relaxed atmosphere. Offer secondary communication options, be clear, non-verbal communication, and also allow them time to respond. I always say 6-second rule. So when you've asked them something, give them time to process and then actually give them time to respond. Because this was something that was a real bugbear of mine when I first started. Because as you can imagine, wings in the prison are very noisy, very busy, lots going on, and so for the operational staff to sort of like take on this process, it was like, oh, I ain't got time. I said, well, actually, yes, you need to make time. So it was about, and it does seem to be working much, much better now. So it's just really, really simple things, but it can actually impact massively on how an outcome can sort of like be achieved without things getting becoming escalated. So how do we need to communicate? So the environment, just be aware of the environment. In a prison, it's quite difficult to do. And that's why, as I said before, I've created 2 areas on a couple of the wings where I can go and have one-to-one sessions in a calm, relaxed atmosphere, but also it's available to all of the staff as well. So slow everything down, don't rush. I think in life, everyone's sort of like rushing and rushing. Just calm things down, and you find that if you calm things down, it relaxes them and they feel much more relaxed and much more open, and you'll get much more out of that person. Do not ask questions or even talk sometimes. Like I said to you, when I first started working in the prison, it was a huge lack of trust within the whole system. And so it's about building up that relationship to get the right information and to feel comfortable, because like we said, there could be lots more going on, as we're going to touch on in a moment, as well as the neurodiverse needs. So and if they need to stim, let them stim. If they need to twizzle on the chair, let them twizzle on the chair. So other considerations, it might be that they're not able to process the information. So again, give them time to answer. Don't rush them to answer. Sometimes it might be that, in a situation within the prison, emotions are quite high, and so it could take quite some time for that person to calm down enough to be able to share how they're feeling and say what was wrong. So again, a lot of it is about giving them time, and listening. Okay. And if they can't calm down, then give them the option to revisit, and just let them calm down. And again, that's where we use the traffic light system in the prison, where I've been to see Joe and he's not feeling great. I'm going to come back and see him later. So always give them that option. Never feel as though you need to push for them to have that conversation there and then. Okay. So the next bit is about attachment issues that we've touched on. This is something that is really, really quite common in prison. Early childhood relationships play a crucial role in shaping the child's cognitive, emotional, and social development. Through relationships, children learn how to think, understand, communicate, behave, express emotions, and develop social skills. So I think the majority of us on this teams today will have worked with someone that has attachment issues. And again, if there's neurodiverse needs as well, it's like a double whammy that we have to work with. Often we would look at we'd get them regulated, get them settled, but we would do work around the attachment. And often, if there's childhood trauma, it does make sort of like working with this person quite hard going. And so we do need to sort of like reach out to others and work with mental health, work with the forensic psychologist in the prison, just to make sure that we've got the right support in place and they're not being overwhelmed by lots and lots of staff dipping in, because that is probably something that they've had, in their younger years. So signs of attachment. So in adults, it could be problems forming emotional bonds with others, difficulties with boundaries, their need for control, which obviously is quite limited in prison. So this could, escalate their behaviours. Risky behaviours, again, trouble with maintaining eye contact, impulsivity, increased chance of entering unhealthy relationships, and also links to personality disorders and other comorbidities. We have quite a lot of the young adults that come in that have been in the care system that do form attachments to staff, not in a bad way. It's more about for support, but obviously we have to be mindful that this staff, is supported as well. We do have specific support in prisons for young adults. We have outside agencies that come in and work with them, but essentially, it's managed in the prison by our mental health staff and our care team. Okay, so I just wanted to show you this. This is part of my training package. And I know from my social care days, and we've probably all seen this, but it's the Maslow's pyramid hierarchy. So basically, the bottom slot, the physiological needs. So everyone normally has food, warmth, water, and rest. Safe, we all feel safe and secure. Belongingness, we have good relationships with parents or carers and loved ones, friends. And so as it goes up, but a lot of the men that we work with have had different experiences, and a lot of these parts of this pyramid are missing. So some of the men that I've worked with, yes, they've sort of like been fed and watered, but a lot of them have had no parenting. They've been subject to different abuse. They haven't felt safe, and so you often find that a lot of the ones with that have been through the care system, not all of them, but some of them have, real difficulties in forming relationships and trusting people. And so we put support strategies in place to help with this. So the next bit, as we covered on, was the adverse childhood experiences. So this could be anything from abuse to neglect, or growing up in a household where, parents have been reliant on drugs or alcohol. mental health issues, where there's domestic violence. And often after having these one-to-one conversations with the prisoners, when they've been highlighted to me, this is something that they really, really want to talk about. And we do offer that support in the prison. But because we're a remand prison, we have to be mindful that they have enough time with us to complete this trauma-informed work. Because often if we start that work and then they get moved on, it can often have, you know, a real bad impact on how they manage their time in the new setting. So we do make sure that we have enough time to complete that work. And if we don't, then we will put a hold on a move to make sure that that has been completed before they get transferred out or released. So this is something that, again, is provided by the prison, and the support is brilliant. Actually, I was quite amazed at how much support prisoners do have, you know, from them arriving in the prison to them being released back into the community. Okay, Jill, I think you're next up. Jill?
I'm on mute. Said I wouldn't be able to get away with it. Sam and I do talk about this from the prison setting perspective, but these men that end up with us are children in the beginning, and some of their needs they have childhood diagnosis of autism or ADHD and not gone recognised. So in terms of sensory processing, if you think where adults display this differently, there's sort of they might express violence in a school in terms of being touched, in terms of the noise, in terms of the change. And it's how we would wish to people to try and step back and try and how we address that in a school setting, home setting, and earlier intervention to avoid the support needs to avoid them in the criminal justice system, really. So understanding where sensory can be that hyper, whether they're seeking it, so seeking sensory reward or trying to avoid it, and that sensory overload where we can experience the stimming, flapping, pacing, pressure, all of those, or not wanting to be touched, not coping with their items being touched. All of what we see in adulthood were all presented and probably magnified as children, which why they were excluded from school and it wasn't as successful at home. So understanding that expressing these strong emotions and these big processes to all sensory things, it is an indication of a need to do it in a different way, because of a neurodiverse brain is responding to a complex community situation, school, home, or shops, in a very different way. So we know crowds can trigger schools in a noisy classroom, change in a classroom, somebody that touches you, a teacher change. So a lot of ours that we work with talk about their violence in school was when they changed a teacher, when they put them with a supply teacher, when a child took something off them and a teacher didn't see what was happening. So, and then they get that meltdown situation that they can't regulate. So how do we manage that? Well, we look at how we communicate through social stories, how you can make an adjustment to where things can be removed from that situation to calm, how they express it, where we can get quiet areas, where there's time for processing. Sam talked about processing, that processing information, that situation where young people, children or adults have that social camouflaging, i.e. masking to fit into their environment, to conform with neurotypical norms, is emotionally overwhelming. So we have prisoners, you'll have young people and children that need that time on their own to recharge their batteries, whether it's gaming, whether it's in their room, whether it's watching a video, just to help them reprocess the day, because forming and masking to fit in is incredibly difficult, which why recognizing the sensory difficulties are incredibly hard. Next one, Sam.
So one of the things that I do in my evening workshop on a Tuesday night is I mentioned that we cover anger, because as you can understand, a lot of the people that come through the prison are very angry, maybe due to the sentencing. It could be that they're angry that they're not with their family. So I always do this exercise because I believe that all behaviour is a form of communication. So I don't cover, it's not bad behaviour, it's more about anger and how they are seen. So we look at the physical, what they do physically when they become angry. And I would say 75% of the men that I've done this exercise with, because the one that I give you is just a blank page with the iceberg. And when I start to talk about what they're feeling under the water, which is what they've internalized and how they're feeling, they have never sort of like put together their behaviors of what they've done, whether it be they've hit someone, they've broken something, they've used aggressive language or they've sworn. They have never really associated it with what was going on at that time. So to get them to think about why they behaved in this way, what was going on, how were they feeling, where were they? And so it gets them thinking about different scenarios, different situations, and why they've got angry. And so it just gets them thinking more about emotions. And especially with autistic people, they often struggle with emotions anyway. But if you give them a scenario of when they've got angry, it gives them a little bit more insight into how their bodies deal with different situations. So this is something that works really well with the men, and it does get them talking about how they're feeling or how they felt. And so it's always something that, you can get so much information out of someone if you give them a situation. What happened? Where was you? Who was there? How was you feeling? Rather than, well, I just got angry and I did this. Okay, you explore, and and it's about the listen to what they're saying. So for me, that's so important. So just to summarize them, really, essentially we all try and do this, and in our roles as neurodiversity support managers, this is something that we're all quite passionate about. And so building positive relationship, for me, that is paramount. If you want to get as much as you can out of this person and make sure that they have positive outcomes and a positive, reintegration back into society, relationships are key. Reframing our language, so always use the name first to gain their attention. Often a lot of these men haven't been called by their name, whether it be because they're homeless, or they've just had bad experiences, or they've been in and out of the care system. Use the name first, make it personal. Listen, that is so important. Just listen, because you get so much out of listening rather than asking lots and lots of questions. People tend to talk more if they're comfortable. Do what you say you're going to do. It's about building trust and respect. When I first started at the prison, because I was new and I wanted to do everything, and make everyone fixed, and I was like, yeah, I'll come back tomorrow and I'll do this. And then something came up and I didn't. And people with autism hold you to that. So now I've learned I will come back and see you, once I've got all this in place. Okay. Never give a time scale as such. Show empathy and validation, understand what they're saying. Yeah, I understand what you're saying, and I will try and help you with this. Black and white language, that's what they need. They need clear, concise conversation so that they understand. Okay. Be funny, make a joke of it, put them at ease. We have neurodiversity champions at HMP Lincoln. So we have them on each wing. We have quite a lot on the VP wing. And so there's lots and lots of support. So signpost them, to someone. They might feel more comfortable talking to their peers, or from a school setting, it might be that, they talk to their friends or their buddy at school. Establish clear boundaries. Yeah. Whenever we're working with prisoners, obviously we have to look at safety. Are we safe to work with these people one-to-one? And so always make sure that you're safe and you have clear boundaries. explain about the expectations of what you can do, what they can do, and how you can work together to get a positive outcome. Again, give them the 6-second leave them time to process and answer rather than rushing them. And again, signposting to relevant professionals. Okay, so Jill, you're going to talk about one of our case studies. These are actually true cases, and so we've got a offender's journey. So we just wanted to share this with you, just for you to think about, and maybe there's a little form afterwards, so you can maybe do this after the training, after the presentation. I'll show you it. Okay, Jill, do you want to read it out?
I'm mindful that they've got 1 minute left, so we'll leave this. You'll have this. What you can look this from your perspective of communication. Matthew was 18, was 8, was 10, was 12 once. Some of these traits that we're talking about in here were evident when he was young. He'll have done the same sort of things in a school environment. So explore and look at how you see. If you see a challenge, look beyond the challenge. Look to the communication, because there's something behind that. And I think that's what we would ask, that people see beyond the behaviour to how, as adults, we change our communication to address that somebody might be an undiagnosed with a neurodiverse need. And that hits it on 10:30. So have a look at that by all means. The scenario, the case study, because they are the real people we work with. But thank you very much for your time this morning. If anybody does any questions, you can pop them in the chat, or you can have your mic.
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you ever so much. That was really interesting. I think to understand the impact of sort of what we're doing with children, and how, let's say, we can hand up in that sort of criminal justice system. If anyone does have any questions, please feel free to put your hand up or put some in the chat. I have put a survey in the chat. But I appreciate we're all very busy, so if you need to leave, that's fine. But we will hang around in case there's any questions.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody.